The mahogany boardroom table gleamed under fluorescent lights as 23 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions I couldn't read. I had walked into Meridian Properties countless times over 12 years, but this Tuesday morning felt different. The walls seemed to close in as David Castellano stood at the head of the table in his perfectly pressed navy suit, his silver hair catching the light like a crown. For over a decade, I had sat to his right in these meetings. Today, that chair was occupied by someone else. Ladies and gentlemen, David's voice boomed with the authority that had built a real estate empire. I want you to see the future of Meridian Properties, my daughter, Victoria Castellano. The applause thundered in my ears as Victoria smiled with practiced perfection, her designer dress immaculate, her Stanford MBA practically glowing on her forehead. She looked like she belonged in magazines, not construction sites. I clapped along mechanically, while my world crumbled. The partnership papers in my briefcase suddenly felt like dead weight. The executive strategy meeting email that had brought me here finally made sickening sense. Victoria will be taking over as CEO effective immediately, David continued, his voice dripping with fatherly pride I had foolishly thought might someday extend to me. And Elena Rodriguez will transition to our new Vice President of Regulatory Compliance. Compliance. The word hit me like a sledgehammer. After 12 years of transforming his struggling family business into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse, they were handing me a desk job and a stack of permits. My journey to this moment of betrayal began in 2011 when I was 31 and working as a trauma surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital. For 7 years, I had lived in operating rooms, my hands steady, my mind sharp, my purpose clear. Every day brought new challenges, new lives to save, new moments where everything hung in the balance. Then came the night that changed everything. I was 6 hours into a complex surgery, a car accident victim with internal bleeding and multiple fractures. My hands were tired, but my focus was laser sharp. That's when the lights flickered, then went out completely. Emergency power kicked in, but the damage was done. In those critical seconds of darkness, I lost the patient. The investigation cleared me of wrongdoing. Equipment failure, they said. Unavoidable tragedy. But I knew better. I had hesitated for half a second when the lights went out. Just half a second of doubt, and that hesitation cost a 24-year-old father his life. I quit surgery that day. For 3 months, I drifted. My savings dwindled, my purpose evaporated, and my confidence lay in pieces. That's when I saw the job posting. Administrative assistant, Meridian Properties. Detail-oriented professional needed for growing real estate company. Medical background preferred. Meridian Properties occupied a modest office building in downtown Phoenix, far from the gleaming towers of major real estate firms. David Castellano met me in a conference room that doubled as storage space, boxes of files stacked against unwashed windows. He was 53 then, with salt and pepper hair and hands that looked like they had built things. His suit was off the rack, his office cluttered, and his handshake firm enough to break bones. "You're overqualified," he said, scanning my resume. "Why would a surgeon want to file permits and schedule appointments?" I had rehearsed this answer, but when the moment came, I told him the truth. Because I need to build something instead of just trying to fix what's broken. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But I should warn you, this isn't glamorous work. We're small, we're scrappy, and we don't have time for people who can't adapt." "I've worked 18-hour shifts in emergency rooms," I said. "I think I can handle long days and high pressure." He laughed, a genuine sound that filled the cluttered room. "When can you start?" That afternoon, I signed a contract paying half what I had made as a surgeon. The office was cramped, the computers ancient, and the filing system a disaster. But for the first time in months, I felt something resembling hope. What I didn't know was that David was struggling to keep Meridian afloat. The 2008 recession had nearly killed the company, and despite recovery beginning, they were operating on fumes and prayer. My medical background wasn't a preference, it was desperation. David figured someone who could handle life-or-death situations might handle his business's life-or-death situation. On my first day, he handed me a stack of overdue paperwork and said, "Elena, Welcome to organized chaos. Try not to let it kill you. My first week at Meridian was like drinking from a fire hose. David had hired me as an administrative assistant, but it quickly became clear the job description was do whatever needs doing to keep this place from collapsing. The office ran on coffee, determination, and controlled panic. 7 employees, including David and myself. 2 agents, a receptionist who doubled as bookkeeper, a maintenance coordinator who tripled as security guard, and 2 part-time assistants who seemed to exist primarily to lose important documents. My medical training kicked in immediately. In surgery, you learn to see patterns, diagnose problems before they become fatal, and work systematically under pressure. Real estate, I discovered, needed exactly those skills. The first pattern I noticed was the filing system, or lack thereof. Contracts were scattered across 3 cabinets, permit applications mixed with marketing materials, and nobody knew where anything was. In a hospital, that disorganization kills patients. In real estate, it kills deals. I spent my first month creating a system that actually made sense. Color-coded files, digital backups, tracking spreadsheets, showing exactly where every project stood. David noticed immediately. "Elena," he said one Friday afternoon, watching me organize property assessments, "you're not just filing things. You're thinking about them." "Force of habit," I replied. In the ER, you learn to see the big picture while handling details. He leaned against my desk, curious. "What's the big picture here?" I pulled out a spreadsheet I had been working on, a comprehensive overview of all Meridian's active projects, their timelines, potential roadblocks, and profit projections. We're bleeding money on the Morrison Street development because permits are stalled. The West Side project is ahead of schedule but over budget due to material cost overruns. And the downtown renovation is sitting idle because nobody followed up with the Historical Society. David stared at the spreadsheet like I had shown him a map to buried treasure. "How long did this take you?" "About 2 weeks of lunch breaks," I said. "But David, this is just organization. The real problem is nobody's looking at these projects as connected pieces. Each one affects the others: cash flow, resource allocation, timeline dependencies." That was the moment everything changed. David pulled up a chair and spent 2 hours walking through every project with me, seeing his business through new eyes. By the end, he had promoted me to project coordinator and doubled my salary. More importantly, he had started trusting my judgment. Over the next 6 months, I immersed myself in real estate like I had once immersed myself in medicine. I studied zoning laws like anatomy, memorized building codes like pharmaceutical interactions, and analyzed market trends with the same intensity one had brought to diagnostic imaging. The other employees noticed changes. Projects stalled for months, suddenly moved forward. Contractors giving Meridian the runaround found themselves dealing with someone who had done her homework and wouldn't be intimidated. City officials discovered the woman calling about permits knew exactly what she was talking about. "You've got a killer instinct," David told me after I negotiated a particularly difficult contract. "But it's not mean-spirited. It's surgical." By the end of my first year, Meridian had completed more projects than in the previous 3 years combined. Profit margins were up 30%, and David was talking about expansion. "I've been thinking," he said during my annual review, "how would you feel about a partnership track? Not immediately, but eventually. You've proven you understand this business better than people who've been in it for decades."
Partnership.
The word hung in the air like a promise. After everything I had lost, the idea of building something that would partially belong to me felt like redemption. "I'd like that," I said, trying to keep emotion out of my voice. He smiled and shook my hand. "Then let's build something amazing, Elena." And we did. For 11 more years, we built something amazing. The transformation of Meridian Properties from struggling family business to real estate powerhouse didn't happen overnight. It took 5 years of systematic growth, strategic planning, and calculated risks that would make most people lose sleep. For me, it was the most exciting period of my professional life. By 2013, I had been promoted to Director of Operations, and David included me in every major decision. The trust between us had deepened beyond professional respect into something that felt like family. He was the father figure I had never had, and I was the daughter he could depend on to understand his vision and make it reality. The first major expansion came when the Riverside District became available for development. 40 acres of abandoned industrial land the city was desperate to see transformed. Other developers had passed on it. Too much environmental cleanup, too many zoning complications, too risky. I spent 3 months researching every aspect. I analyzed soil samples, studied traffic patterns, researched demographic trends, and built financial models accounting for every possible variable. My surgical training had taught me that the more you know before you cut, the better your chances of success. This could make us, I told David, spreading blueprints across his office floor. Or it could break us. But I think the risk is manageable if we phase development correctly. He studied my projections, then looked at me with that expression of trust one had come to cherish. What's your gut tell you, Elena? My gut says we're the only firm in the city crazy enough to make this work, I said. And sometimes crazy is exactly what you need. We got the Riverside contract, and I managed every aspect of development. I coordinated with environmental engineers, negotiated with city planners, supervised construction teams, and handled marketing strategy. It was like conducting a symphony where every instrument had to be perfectly timed, or the whole performance would collapse. 2 years later, Riverside District was featured on the cover of Southwest Development magazine as the project that redefined urban renewal. The mixed-use development included residential towers, retail space, office buildings, and a public park, transforming a dead zone into the city's most desirable address. More importantly, it had tripled Meridian's net worth. David promoted me to executive vice president and gave me 5% equity, ownership that felt like validation of everything I had sacrificed. You didn't just manage this project, he told me at the celebration dinner. You were the architect of our future. The Riverside success opened doors locked for decades. Suddenly, Meridian was competing for contracts that previously went to firms 10 times our size. Cities across the Southwest were calling with development opportunities. Investors were lining up to fund our projects. I developed what became known internally as the Rodriguez Method, a systematic approach to project evaluation combining financial analysis, risk assessment, and market research with obsessive attention to detail. Every project had to pass through a dozen checkpoints before we would even consider a proposal. The method worked. Between 2015 and 2020, Meridian completed 37 major developments, without a single failure. Our profit margins were the highest in the industry, our reputation spotless, and our client waiting list stretched for months. I wasn't just David's right hand anymore, I was his strategic brain. Every major decision flowed through me. Every contract bore my fingerprints. Every success story had my name attached, even if not always in headlines. Media attention focused on David, which made sense. He was the face of the company, the charismatic leader who could charm investors and city councilors equally. But industry insiders knew the truth. Elena Rodriguez was the engine that made Meridian Properties run. In 2019, we completed our largest project ever, a $200 million mixed-use development in downtown Scottsdale, including luxury condos, premium retail space, and a boutique hotel. The project took 3 years and required coordination between dozens of contractors, suppliers, and regulatory agencies. I managed every aspect personally, working 18-hour days for months. There were moments when the stress felt familiar, the same high-stakes pressure I had experienced in surgery, where one mistake could destroy everything. But this time, there were no equipment failures, no moments of doubt, no disasters I couldn't prevent or fix. The Scottsdale project finished ahead of schedule and under budget, earning Meridian the Southwest Development Company of the Year award. At the award ceremony, David's acceptance speech included words I still remember. This company succeeds because of extraordinary people who make excellence look effortless. Elena Rodriguez embodies that excellence. I should have savored that moment more. I should have realized it would be the last time David would publicly credit me for anything. Because 3 months later, Victoria Castellano graduated from Stanford with her MBA, and everything I had built started slipping through my fingers like sand. Victoria Castellano arrived at Meridian Properties on a Monday morning in September 2020, and I knew immediately that my world was about to change. She swept into the office like she owned it, which, technically, she would someday, wearing a designer suit that cost more than most employees made in a month. She was 26, fresh from Stanford Business School, with polished confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself to anyone. Her resume was impressive on paper. MBA with honors, internships at prestigious firms, thesis on disruptive innovation in traditional industries. But I had been in real estate for 9 years by then, and I knew the difference between classroom theory and construction site reality. David introduced her to staff with obvious pride. Victoria has come home to help take Meridian to the next level, he announced. She'll be working closely with all of us to identify new opportunities and optimize our operations. The phrase, optimize our operations, sent a chill down my spine. In my experience, people who talked about optimization usually meant cutting costs and changing systems that already worked perfectly well. Victoria's first week was a whirlwind of meetings and observations. She shadowed me on client calls, attended project management sessions, and asked questions revealing both intelligence and ignorance in equal measure. Why do we still use paper contracts for some vendors? She asked during a budget review. Because 3 of our longest-term contractors are family businesses that prefer traditional documentation, I explained. Their trust is worth more than digital efficiency. She made a note on her tablet. But digitization would improve response times and reduce errors. It would also alienate suppliers who've been loyal to us for 15 years, I said. Sometimes relationships matter more than optimization. Her smile was polite but dismissive. That's very traditional thinking, Elena. Traditional thinking. The phrase stuck like a splinter. Everything I had built at Meridian was based on relationships, trust, and proven systems. If that was traditional, then I was guilty as charged. The real tension began during our first major disagreement. Victoria had been at Meridian 3 weeks when she proposed what she called a market expansion strategy. The plan involved aggressive bidding on projects outside our geographic expertise, partnerships with firms we had never worked with, and timeline compressions that made my surgical training seem relaxed. The Southwest market is saturated, she argued during a strategy meeting. We need to think bigger, multi-state operations, national partnerships, exponential growth. I studied her proposal carefully, running numbers through the same analytical framework that had guided every successful project in Meridian's history. The math didn't work. Victoria, I said carefully, this expansion would require capital investments we don't have, partnerships with firms we can't verify, and timelines that leave no margin for error. One delayed project could bankrupt us. Her eyes flashed with frustration and condescension. Elena, you're thinking like a project manager instead of a visionary. Sometimes you have to take risks to achieve breakthrough results. I'm thinking like someone who's seen this company nearly fail once, I replied. Calculated risks are one thing. Reckless gambles are another. David sat quietly through this exchange, his expression unreadable. For 9 years, he had trusted my judgment on strategic decisions. Now he was watching his daughter challenge everything I represented. Let's table this for now, he said finally. Victoria, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Elena, I appreciate your caution. Let's find a middle ground. But I could see it in his eyes. The shift had begun. For the first time since joining Meridian, David was weighing my advice against someone else's. And that someone else was his daughter. Over the following months, Victoria's presence became more prominent in company operations. She was given her own office, her own projects, and increasingly, her own voice in strategic decisions. David started including her in meetings where I had previously been his only advisor. I watched her work with objective analysis I had once brought to medical diagnoses. Victoria was smart, ambitious, and articulate. She had good instincts about market trends and genuine insights about business development. She was also dangerous. Not maliciously. I don't think she set out to undermine me. But she represented everything I wasn't. Young, connected, formally educated in business, and most importantly, family. Every success she achieved made my contributions look expendable. Every innovative idea she proposed made my proven methods look outdated. The writing was on the wall, but I was too invested in what we had built to read it clearly. I kept believing that experience and results would matter more than blood relations and fresh perspectives. I was wrong. By the time Victoria had been at Meridian 18 months, she wasn't just David's daughter anymore. She was his heir apparent. And I wasn't his trusted partner anymore. I was the old guard standing in the way of the future. The assault on my position at Meridian didn't come as a frontal attack. Victoria was too smart for that. Instead, it came as a series of small cuts, each seemingly insignificant, but collectively designed to bleed me dry of influence and authority. It started with the meetings. For 10 years, David and I had held Monday morning strategy sessions in his office, just the two of us, coffee, and comprehensive review of every active project. These meetings were sacred to me, the weekly pulse check that kept Meridian running smoothly. 3 months after Victoria arrived, David casually mentioned that she would be joining us. Fresh perspective, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You don't mind, do you, Elena? Of course I minded. But you don't build a career in real estate by being petty about organizational changes. Not at all, I said. More minds, better decisions. The dynamic shifted immediately. Instead of David and me working through problems together, it became David listening to two competing viewpoints. Victoria's suggestions were always bold, innovative, and completely theoretical. My responses were practical, evidence-based, and grounded in experience. Guess which approach sounded more exciting to a man who had built his fortune on calculated risks? The second cut came through client relationships. I had spent a decade nurturing connections with key clients, understanding their needs, anticipating their concerns, and delivering results that exceeded expectations. These relationships were the foundation of Meridian's success. Victoria began attending client meetings, initially as an observer, then as a participant, and finally as a co-presenter. She had a gift for making complex projects sound simple and expensive investments sound like bargains. Clients liked her energy, her optimism, and her ability to speak their language of quarterly projections and market disruptions. During one particularly important meeting with Phoenix Development Group, Victoria presented a revised timeline for their downtown project that cut 6 weeks off my carefully planned schedule. Elena's approach is very thorough, she said with a smile that felt like a knife between my ribs, but I think we can achieve the same quality with more efficiency. The client's eyes lit up. 6 weeks meant earlier occupancy, faster revenue, and beating competitors to market. They didn't understand that those 6 weeks represented contingency time for weather delays, permit revisions, and the dozens of small problems that plague every construction project. After the meeting, I cornered Victoria in the hallway. You can't promise timelines without understanding the variables involved, I said, keeping my voice level despite the fury building in my chest. Elena, she replied with patronizing patience, I've run the numbers. With better project management software and streamlined vendor coordination, we can absolutely hit that timeline. And when we don't, when weather delays us by 2 weeks or the city requires additional environmental assessments. She shrugged. Then we adapt. That's what good businesses do. They solve problems instead of anticipating failure. Anticipating failure. As if my decade of successful project management was based on pessimism rather than experience. The third cut was the most painful: staff loyalty. I had mentored most of Meridian's key employees, helping them develop skills, advance their careers, and become essential parts of our success. They trusted me, respected my judgment, and followed my leadership without question. Victoria began scheduling her own staff meetings, presenting her vision for Meridian's future, and gradually building her own power base within the company. She offered opportunities for professional development, talked about promotion tracks, and painted pictures of a more dynamic, growth-oriented organization. Some employees remained loyal to me, but others were seduced by Victoria's promises of advancement and change. The office began to divide into factions, Team Elena and Team Victoria, even though no one spoke about it directly. The most devastating defection was Marcus, my project manager for 3 years and someone I had personally trained. Marcus was brilliant at coordinating complex developments, and I had been grooming him for senior management. Victoria offered him exactly that, a newly created director of strategic development role that would report directly to her instead of through me. "It's a great opportunity," Marcus told me when he broke the news. "Victoria has big plans for the company, and she wants me to be part of the leadership team." I smiled and congratulated him, because that's what professionals do. But inside, I was calculating how many more defections I could survive before my position became untenable. By the summer of 2022, I could feel my influence at Meridian evaporating like water in desert heat. Victoria had successfully inserted herself into every aspect of company operations while maintaining the fiction that we were equal partners in Meridian's leadership. David still valued my experience and relied on my operational expertise, but I could see the shift in his eyes. Victoria represented the future, dynamic, innovative, and carrying his bloodline. I represented the past, reliable, experienced, and ultimately replaceable. The writing wasn't just on the wall anymore. It was being carved into stone, and my name was disappearing one letter at a time. The Apex Towers project landed on my desk in August 2022 like a gift from the real estate gods. At first glance, it looked impossible. A $340 million mixed-use development in downtown Phoenix that would include luxury residential towers, premium retail space, Class A office buildings, and a boutique hotel. The client was Harrison Voss, a reclusive billionaire developer who had built half of Denver and was now looking to expand into the Southwest market. Voss was legendary in the industry, brilliant, demanding, and absolutely ruthless, with contractors who disappointed him. 3 major firms had already pitched for the Apex contract and been rejected. Voss wasn't just looking for a construction company. He was looking for a partner who could understand his vision, execute flawlessly, and deliver a project that would redefine Phoenix's skyline. The RFP was 400 pages of specifications, requirements, and expectations that read like a doctoral thesis in advanced construction management. Most firms would need months to prepare a competitive proposal. I had 3 weeks. "This is our moonshot," David told me when he handed over the project file. "Land this deal, and Meridian becomes a major player nationally. Miss it, and we stay a regional firm forever." Victoria was in Europe on a business development trip, so for the first time in months, I had complete control over a major opportunity. I felt like a surgeon who had finally been given a complex case to handle alone. I spent those 3 weeks living at the office, analyzing every aspect of the Apex project. I studied Voss's previous developments, researched his preferences, and built financial models that accounted for variables other firms probably hadn't even considered. The proposal I assembled was a masterpiece of strategic thinking and operational planning. It included detailed timelines, innovative construction techniques, sustainable building practices, and cost projections that maximized value without sacrificing quality. But the real secret weapon was my understanding of Harrison Voss himself. Through industry contacts and careful research, I learned that Voss wasn't just a developer. He was an architect by training who had transitioned to the business side after becoming frustrated with contractors who couldn't execute his vision. He valued precision, despised corner cutting, and had a reputation for canceling contracts with firms that overpromised and underdelivered. My proposal spoke directly to those concerns. Instead of making unrealistic promises about timelines and costs, I provided realistic projections with built-in contingencies. Instead of focusing on how quickly we could build, I emphasized how well we could build. Instead of treating Apex as just another contract, I positioned it as a partnership between 2 organizations committed to excellence. The presentation was scheduled for Friday morning in September. Voss flew in from Denver with his team, and we met in Meridian's largest conference room. David introduced me as his executive partner and the architect of our success, which felt like validation after months of watching Victoria erode my position. For 90 minutes, I walked Voss through every aspect of the proposal. I explained our construction methodology, demonstrated our project management systems, and answered technical questions that revealed both his expertise and his interest. When I finished, the room was silent for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. "Ms. Rodriguez," Voss said finally, This is the most comprehensive proposal I've received for any project in 20 years. You clearly understand both the technical requirements and the strategic objectives. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment that would secure my position at Meridian and validate everything I had sacrificed to get there. I have one concern, Voss continued. This project requires a single point of accountability. I need to know that the person who presented this proposal will be the person managing its execution. Can you guarantee that? David stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Voss, I can absolutely guarantee that Elena will have complete authority over the Apex project. She built this proposal, and she'll build your development. Voss nodded and extended his hand to me. Then we have a deal, Ms. Rodriguez. Congratulations. The contract was signed that afternoon, $340 million over 3 years, with performance bonuses that could push the total to $380 million. It was the largest deal in Meridian's history, and I had landed it through pure expertise and determination. That weekend, I allowed myself to believe that I had secured my future at Meridian. The Apex project would take 3 years to complete, during which I would be indispensable to the company's success. By the time it was finished, Victoria would be established in her own role, and there would be room for both of us in Meridian's leadership structure. I was living in a fantasy. Victoria returned from Europe the following Monday and immediately requested a briefing on the Voss deal. I walked her through the contract details, project requirements, and management structure I had established. This is incredible work, Elena, she said with what seemed like genuine admiration. Dad was right to put his faith in you. For a moment, I felt hopeful that we could work together as partners rather than competitors. That hope lasted exactly 6 days. The following Monday, David called me into his office for what I assumed would be a celebration of our Apex success. Instead, I found Victoria sitting across from his desk with a folder of documents spread between them. Elena, David said without preamble, we need to discuss the management structure for the Apex project. My stomach dropped. I thought we had already established that. Voss specifically wanted me to maintain accountability. Victoria leaned forward with a sympathetic expression that didn't fool me for a second. Elena, nobody questions your expertise. But this project is too important to rest on any single person's shoulders. We need redundancy, oversight, and fresh perspectives. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, though I already knew. David cleared his throat. Victoria will be serving as executive oversight for Apex, with final approval authority on all major decisions. You'll continue as project director with day-to-day operational control. Executive oversight. The words hit me like a diagnosis of terminal cancer. Victoria would have veto power over my decisions while I retained responsibility for execution. If the project succeeded, she would share credit. If it failed, I would bear the blame. David, I said carefully, Harrison Voss specifically chose Meridian because he trusted me to manage this project. How do you think he'll react to learning that someone else now has final authority? Victoria answered before David could speak. Mr. Voss contracted with Meridian Properties, not with Elena Rodriguez personally. He'll understand that companies evolve and structures change. But I knew Harrison Voss better than Victoria did. He had chosen Meridian because he trusted my expertise and my authority. Diluting that authority would be seen as a breach of trust, exactly the kind of corporate manipulation that had driven him away from other firms. I should have fought harder. I should have threatened to walk away, knowing that losing me would probably mean losing the Apex contract. But I was still trapped in the mindset of loyalty and collaboration that had defined my career at Meridian. If this is what you think is best for the company, I said quietly, then I'll make it work. David smiled with relief. That's the Elena I know, always putting the company first. But as I walked out of his office, I realized that putting the company first had become indistinguishable from putting myself last. And for the first time in 12 years, I began to wonder if loyalty was just another word for stupidity. The Apex Towers project became a masterclass in corporate sabotage disguised as collaboration. For 6 months, I managed every aspect of the development while Victoria provided oversight, which meant second-guessing my decisions, delaying critical approvals, and inserting herself into every client interaction. Harrison Voss noticed the change immediately. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said during our first quarterly review with Victoria present, "I contracted with Meridian because I wanted to work with you directly. Who is this person, and why does she have authority over decisions you're qualified to make?" Victoria answered with smooth confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for a real failure. "Mr. Voss, I'm Victoria Castellano, Executive Oversight for the Apex Project. My role is to ensure that all decisions align with Meridian's broader strategic objectives." Voss's expression could have frozen concrete. Strategic objectives? Ms. Rodriguez presented a plan that was already strategically sound. "Are you suggesting her expertise is insufficient?" "Not at all," Victoria replied, her smile never wavering. "Elena is exceptionally talented. But projects of this magnitude require multiple perspectives and collaborative decision-making." I watched Voss's opinion of Meridian Properties shift in real time. He had chosen us specifically to avoid the bureaucratic inefficiency that plagued larger firms. Now we were demonstrating exactly that inefficiency before his eyes. After the meeting, Voss pulled me aside privately. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to be direct. I contracted with you, not with your organization's management hierarchy. If this arrangement continues, I'll be reconsidering our partnership." The threat was clear, and I knew I had to act. I scheduled a meeting with David that afternoon, armed with documentation of Victoria's interference and Voss's growing frustration. "David, we're going to lose the Apex contract if this continues," I said, spreading emails and meeting notes across his desk. Voss specifically objected to Victoria's oversight role. He wants direct accountability, not management by committee. David studied the documents with the expression of a man trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Elena, I understand your frustration, but Victoria brings valuable perspective to complex projects." "What perspective?" I asked, my professional composure finally cracking. "She's been here 18 months. She's never managed a project from start to finish. She's never dealt with the kind of problems that can kill a $340 million development. She's been educated specifically for this kind of strategic thinking," David replied. "Sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that experience might miss." Strategic thinking. Fresh eyes. The same phrases Victoria used to justify every interference. I realized that David wasn't just supporting his daughter. He was becoming convinced that her approach was superior to mine. "David," I said quietly, "Voss chose Meridian because he trusted my expertise. If you don't trust that same expertise, maybe I'm not the right person for this job." It was a bluff, but I hoped it would remind him of everything I had contributed to the company's success. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said words that shattered my remaining illusions. "Elena, maybe it's time we both acknowledge that your skills are better suited to operational management than executive leadership." Operational management. After 12 years of building his empire, I was being relegated to middle management while his daughter inherited the executive suite. 3 weeks later, Victoria made a decision that crystallized everything wrong with her approach. Without consulting me, she approved a change order for the Apex project that accelerated the construction timeline by 6 weeks, exactly the kind of unrealistic promise that had worried me from the beginning. When I discovered what she had done, I confronted her immediately. "Victoria, you can't make timeline commitments without understanding the operational implications," I said. "This change order puts the entire project at risk." Her response was a perfect example of MBA confidence meeting construction reality. "Elena, you're thinking like a project manager instead of a business leader. Sometimes you have to push boundaries to exceed client expectations." 2 weeks later, Phoenix was hit by the worst winter storm in a decade. The accelerated timeline Victoria had promised became impossible when construction sites turned into frozen mud for 10 days straight. The project fell behind schedule, cost overruns began mounting, and Harrison Voss's patience evaporated completely. When Voss called an emergency conference to discuss the delays, I could have thrown Victoria under the bus. I could have explained that the accelerated timeline was her decision, made without my input or approval. I could have saved my own reputation at her expense. Instead, I did what I had always done at Meridian Properties. I took responsibility and tried to fix the problem. Mr. Voss, the timeline adjustment was aggressive, and we underestimated the weather risk. I take full responsibility for this oversight. Here's how we're going to get back on track. For 30 minutes, I outlined a recovery plan that would minimize delays, control costs, and deliver the quality Voss expected. It was a masterpiece of crisis management, and it worked. Voss agreed to the revised timeline, accepted the additional costs, and expressed confidence in my ability to deliver the project successfully. But David and Victoria saw something different in that conference call. They saw me admitting to a mistake I hadn't made, taking responsibility for a decision I hadn't supported, and cleaning up a mess that could have been avoided if they had listened to my expertise. The next morning, I found a meeting request in my inbox. Executive transition discussion. Confidential. I knew exactly what that meeting would contain, and for the first time in 12 years, I was almost grateful. The betrayal was finally going to be official, which meant I could stop pretending it wasn't happening. The meeting that destroyed my career lasted exactly 23 minutes. I know because I stared at the clock on the conference room wall, watching my professional life dissolve 1 second at a time. David sat at the head of the mahogany table in his perfectly pressed navy suit, looking like a judge about to deliver a sentence. Victoria sat to his right in the chair that had been mine for over a decade, her expression managing to convey both sympathy and inevitability. The other board members, 3 outside investors who had joined when Meridian expanded, filled the remaining seats. These were people I had worked with for years, whose confidence I had earned through consistent results and unwavering professionalism. Now, they wouldn't meet my eyes. "Elena," David began, his voice carrying the weight of finality, "we need to discuss the future organizational structure of Meridian Properties." I had prepared for this conversation, but hearing those words still felt like a punch to the chest. "Of course, David. What are you thinking?" He slid a folder across the table. "The board has been reviewing our leadership needs in light of recent growth and market opportunities. We've concluded that the company requires a more dynamic executive structure." I opened the folder and found documents that had obviously been prepared weeks earlier, organizational charts, job descriptions, and a transition timeline that had my name conspicuously absent from senior management. As you can see, Victoria added with practiced corporate speak, "We're restructuring around core competencies and strategic vision. Your operational expertise remains invaluable, but we need executive leadership that can drive innovation and growth." Translation: they were pushing me out while trying to make it sound like a promotion. The new structure was elegant in its cruelty. Victoria would become CEO, with full authority over strategic direction and client relationships. David would remain as chairman, focusing on industry relationships and board governance. And I would become vice president of regulatory compliance, a title that sounded important but meant absolutely nothing. "What does regulatory compliance involve?" I asked, though I already knew. David cleared his throat. "Managing permits, coordinating inspections, ensuring code compliance, all the detailed work that keeps projects moving smoothly." All the detailed work. After 12 years of building his empire, I was being assigned to push paper and schedule inspections. They were offering me a job that any competent administrator could handle, with a title designed to obscure the humiliation. "And the Apex project?" I asked. Victoria answered smoothly. "You'll transition operational control to Marcus over the next month. I'll maintain executive oversight to ensure continuity with Mr. Voss." Marcus, my former protege, now being positioned as my replacement. The betrayal had layers I was still discovering. I looked around the table at faces I had once considered allies. Board members who had celebrated my successes, praised my contributions, and relied on my expertise to guide their investments. Now they sat in silence while I was systematically dismantled. "I need to understand something," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "The Apex contract exists because of my relationship with Harrison Voss. The Riverside development succeeded because of my project management. Meridian's reputation in this market was built on systems I created and relationships I nurtured. How exactly does removing me from leadership improve the company's prospects?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, one of the board members, Jonathan Pierce, whose construction firm had been struggling before I helped him secure 3 major subcontracts through Meridian, spoke up. Elena, your contributions have been enormous. But the industry is changing. We need leadership that understands digital transformation, generational marketing, and scalable growth strategies. Digital transformation, generational marketing, scalable growth strategies. Buzzwords that sounded impressive, but had nothing to do with the practical realities of managing construction projects and maintaining client relationships. Jonathan, I said quietly, do you remember the Phoenix Convention Center project 3 years ago? When the structural engineer discovered foundation problems that could have bankrupted both our companies? He nodded uncomfortably. I spent 4 days coordinating with city inspectors, structural consultants, and insurance adjusters to find a solution that saved the project and protected everyone involved. That wasn't digital transformation, that was experience, expertise, and the kind of problem-solving that comes from actually understanding how buildings get built. Another uncomfortable silence. These people knew exactly what I had contributed to Meridian's success, but they had already made their decision. Facts and logic weren't going to change minds that had been made up in private conversations I wasn't invited to. Victoria broke the silence with the kind of corporate speak that turns human beings into human resources. Elena, change is always difficult, but it's essential for growth. Your new role will allow you to focus on your core strengths while positioning the company for future opportunities. Future opportunities. As if my 12 years of building the foundation for those opportunities was now an obstacle to achieving them. I closed the folder and looked directly at David. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been regret or shame. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by the resolve of a man who had made his choice. David, I said, when I started here, you told me that hard work would take me places. You were right. It took me to a place where I could be discarded the moment it became convenient. His jaw tightened. Elena, that's not fair. This isn't personal, it's business. Business, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? I stood up, gathering what remained of my dignity. I need time to consider this offer. Of course, Victoria said with synthetic understanding. Take all the time you need. The transition timeline is flexible. But we all knew there was no real choice being offered. I could accept the demotion and remain at Meridian as a highly paid administrator, or I could walk away from everything I had built. As I reached the door, David called my name. Elena, I hope you understand. This is about securing Meridian's future. I turned back to face him one last time. David, I am Meridian's future. Or I was, until you decided blood was thicker than competence. I walked out of that conference room knowing I would never sit at that table again. The partnership I had been promised was gone, the respect I had earned was worthless, and the empire I had built was being handed to someone whose greatest qualification was her last name. But as I cleaned out my office that afternoon, packing 12 years of achievements into cardboard boxes, I felt something unexpected alongside the anger and betrayal. Relief. For the first time in over a decade, I was free to build something that belonged entirely to me. The call came 3 days after I submitted my resignation letter. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the Phoenix skyline through windows I had once admired with pride, now feeling like a stranger in my own city. The name on my phone screen made my pulse quicken. Harrison Voss. Ms. Rodriguez. His voice was as direct as ever, cutting through pleasantries like a scalpel. I understand you're no longer with Meridian Properties. Word traveled fast in the development world. That's correct, Mr. Voss. As of Monday, I'm officially unemployed. Good, he said, surprising me. Because I have a proposition that might interest you. For the next 20 minutes, Harrison Voss outlined an opportunity that seemed too good to be true. He had been planning to establish a Southwest regional office for his development company, and my departure from Meridian had accelerated his timeline. I need someone who understands this market, who has the relationships and expertise to manage major projects without the bureaucratic nonsense that seems to plague established firms, he said. Based on our interactions over the past year, I believe you're that person. The offer was staggering. CEO of Voss Development Southwest, with a starting salary 40% higher than what I had been making at Meridian, equity participation, and most importantly, complete operational authority over all regional projects. There's one condition, Voss continued. I want to move the Apex Towers project to the new company. Meridian breached our agreement when they changed the management structure without my consent. I'm terminating the contract and offering it to you directly. My breath caught. The Apex project, $340 million, 3 years of guaranteed work, and the foundation for building a major development firm. The contract I had won for Meridian was being offered to me personally. Mr. Voss, I said carefully, I appreciate the offer, but I need to understand the implications. This would mean competing directly with my former employer. Ms. Rodriguez, his voice carried a hint of amusement, they chose to replace you with someone whose primary qualification is nepotism. That's not your problem. It's their failure of judgment. He was right, but accepting his offer would mean declaring war on everything I had spent 12 years building. David, Victoria, and the entire Meridian organization would see this as the ultimate betrayal. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course. But Elena, may I call you Elena? You've spent 12 years making other people rich and powerful while accepting scraps of recognition. Don't you think it's time to build something for yourself? After he hung up, I sat in my apartment for hours, weighing the decision that would define the rest of my career. Accepting Voss's offer meant burning every bridge I had built in Phoenix, competing against former colleagues, and starting over at 43 with nothing but my reputation and expertise. But staying meant watching Victoria destroy everything I had created while being relegated to regulatory compliance and administrative busywork. It meant accepting that loyalty and competence were less valuable than family connections and MBA credentials. The decision crystallized when I received a text from Marcus. Elena, we're already 3 weeks behind schedule. Victoria keeps changing specifications without understanding the implications. Voss is furious. We need your help. They needed my help, but they didn't want to pay for my leadership. They wanted me to fix their problems while accepting their hierarchy. They wanted my expertise without my authority. I called Harrison Voss back that evening. Mr. Voss, I accept your offer. When do we start? Tomorrow, he said with satisfaction. I'll have contracts ready by morning, and we'll begin the Apex transition immediately. Welcome to Voss Development Southwest, Elena. The next morning, I woke up as the CEO of a development company that didn't exist yet but already had a $340 million project and the backing of one of the most respected developers in the country. For the first time in years, I felt like a surgeon again, completely in control, fully responsible, and finally free to operate without someone else's hands guiding mine. The transition from unemployed to CEO happened faster than I could process. Within 2 weeks of accepting Voss's offer, I had an office lease, a business license, and a name that felt like destiny, Rodriguez Development Group. The office space was modest, just 2,000 square feet in a downtown high-rise, but the view was spectacular. From my corner office, I could see half the developments I had managed for Meridian Properties, including the Riverside district that had made David's reputation and my career. Harrison Voss flew in from Denver to finalize the Apex transition and establish the operational framework for RDG. He arrived with contracts, capital commitments, and a confidence in my abilities that felt both validating and terrifying. Elena, he said as we signed the partnership agreement, I've been in this business for 30 years. I can recognize exceptional talent when I see it, and I can recognize when that talent is being wasted. Your former employer made the biggest mistake in their company's history when they chose politics over performance. The Apex Towers project became the foundation for Rodriguez Development Group, but it was just the beginning. Voss had connected me with potential clients across the Southwest, investors looking for development partners, and contractors who had worked with his organization in other markets. More importantly, he had given me something I had never truly had at Meridian: complete authority over every decision. The first major test came when Marcus called me 3 weeks after RDG's launch. The Apex project under Victoria's management was hemorrhaging money and falling further behind schedule. Subcontractors were threatening to walk away, Voss's patience was exhausted, and Meridian was facing potential lawsuits. Elena, Marcus said during a conference call with David and Victoria, we need your expertise to salvage this situation. I listened to their description of the problems: delayed permits, cost overruns, coordination failures, and quality control issues, with the detached interest of a surgeon observing someone else's botched operation. Marcus, I said finally, these problems were predictable 6 months ago when I warned against accelerating the timeline. The solution isn't consulting, it's competent management. Victoria's voice cut through the speakerphone with barely controlled frustration. Elena, we're trying to work collaboratively here. Can you help us or not? I can, I replied. Rodriguez Development Group offers project rescue services at $500 per hour, with a minimum commitment of 200 hours. We'll need complete operational authority and the ability to override previous decisions that created these problems. The silence on the call was deafening. They wanted my expertise, but they weren't willing to pay market rates or acknowledge that their management approach had failed. David finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. Elena, after everything we've built together, this feels vindictive. David, I said calmly, after everything I built for you, this feels like business. They declined my consulting offer, and 2 weeks later, Harrison Voss officially terminated the Apex contract with Meridian Properties. The project transferred completely to Rodriguez Development Group, along with all associated revenues, profits, and growth opportunities. By the end of my first quarter as CEO, RDG had secured 3 additional contracts worth $180 million combined. Word was spreading through the industry that Elena Rodriguez had started her own firm and was delivering the same quality and reliability that had built Meridian's reputation. The irony was perfect. I was using the skills, relationships, and reputation I had developed at Meridian to compete against them in the market I knew better than anyone. Within 6 months, Rodriguez Development Group had grown from a 1-person startup to a 15-employee firm with over $600 million in active contracts. I hired away 3 of Meridian's best project managers, including Marcus, who finally realized that working for competent leadership was worth more than corporate loyalty. The growth was intoxicating, but the real satisfaction came from something deeper. I was finally building something that belonged entirely to me. Every decision reflected my judgment, every success enhanced my reputation, and every profit went toward expanding an organization that shared my values and standards. The first shot in what would become a brutal corporate war came disguised as a friendly phone call. David Castellano's voice was warm and familiar when he reached out 6 months after I had started Rodriguez Development Group. Elena, he said, I think it's time we talked. This competition between us isn't good for either company or the industry. I was in my office reviewing contracts when he called, surrounded by the tangible evidence of RDG's success: signed agreements, architectural plans, and financial projections that showed sustained growth for the next 3 years. David, I replied, I'm not competing with you. I'm just doing business in the same market. Come on, he said with a laugh that sounded forced. You've hired away 3 of our best people, taken contracts we were pursuing, and positioned yourself as the alternative to Meridian Properties. That sounds like competition to me. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't acknowledging the context. I hadn't declared war on Meridian. They had pushed me out and assumed I would disappear quietly. My success was inconvenient for them, not vindictive for me. We met that Friday at a neutral restaurant downtown, the same place where I had once celebrated Meridian's successes as part of David's team. Now I sat across from him as the CEO of a competing firm, and the dynamics had shifted completely. David looked older than I remembered, stress lines deeper around his eyes, his confidence somewhat diminished. Running Meridian without me was apparently more challenging than he had anticipated. Elena, he began after we ordered. I want to be direct. This rivalry isn't sustainable for either of us. We both know this market isn't big enough for 2 firms our size. The market seems plenty big enough for Rodriguez Development Group, I replied. We're booking projects faster than we can staff them. His jaw tightened slightly. Because you're undercutting established pricing structures and making promises you can't keep long-term. I'm delivering results at fair market rates, I corrected. If that looks like undercutting, maybe Meridian's pricing has gotten disconnected from its value proposition. He set down his water glass harder than necessary. Elena, I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. What would it take for you to consider rejoining Meridian as a full partner? Full partner. The phrase I had been waiting to hear for 12 years, now offered when it was too late to matter. David, I said quietly, you had 12 years to make me a partner. Instead, you chose nepotism over merit and pushed me out to make room for your daughter. Now you want me back because competing against me is harder than working with me. Business is business, he said, echoing Victoria's corporate speak. Sometimes timing isn't perfect, but opportunities can be created. You're right, I replied. Business is business. And my business is Rodriguez Development Group. The conversation ended cordially, but I could see the calculation in David's eyes. He had hoped to resolve our competition through negotiation or recruitment. When that failed, he would try other methods. The attacks began subtly, as they always do in business warfare. Potential clients started asking pointed questions about RDG's sustainability and long-term viability. Contractors began requesting additional documentation and insurance verification. City planners suddenly required extra meetings and additional approvals for projects I was managing. I hired a private investigator to document what I suspected was a systematic campaign to undermine RDG's reputation. What she discovered was more sophisticated than I had expected. Victoria Castellano had been conducting what she called industry education sessions, informal conversations with clients, contractors, and city officials about the risks of working with startup development firms. She wasn't making specific accusations against RDG, just raising general concerns about financial stability, project continuity, and quality control. It was brilliant corporate sabotage, damaging my reputation without creating liability for defamation. The second phase of their campaign targeted my employees directly. Marcus and 2 other former Meridian managers received offers to return to their old jobs at significant salary increases, offers contingent on breaking their contracts with RDG and providing transition assistance that would essentially gut my operational capacity. Marcus called me the day he received the offer. Elena, they're offering me 30% more than I'm making here, plus equity participation and a promotion to senior management. That's a generous offer, I said calmly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking they're trying to destroy RDG by buying away your key people, he replied. And I'm thinking that's exactly why I left Meridian in the first place. He turned down the offer, but the message was clear. Meridian was willing to spend significant money to cripple Rodriguez Development Group rather than compete on merit. If they wanted a war, I would give them one they would never forget. The weapon that would destroy Meridian Properties arrived in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, disguised as a routine industry newsletter. Buried in the 3rd paragraph was a single sentence that made my pulse quicken. Phoenix Development Authority seeks qualified firms for the Downtown Renaissance Project. Estimated value $850 million over 5 years. I had been waiting 18 months for an opportunity like this. The Downtown Renaissance Project was the holy grail of Phoenix development, a comprehensive redevelopment of 12 city blocks that would include residential towers, commercial spaces, cultural facilities, and public infrastructure. It was the kind of transformational project that defined careers and established legacies. More importantly, it was exactly the type of project Meridian Properties had been positioning themselves to win for the past 3 years. The RFP was due in 60 days, which meant every major development firm in the Southwest would be scrambling to prepare proposals. But I had advantages they didn't: intimate knowledge of Phoenix's development ecosystem, relationships with every key stakeholder, and a systematic approach to proposal development that I had perfected during my years building David's empire. I spent the next 8 weeks crafting the most comprehensive development proposal of my career. The RDG submission was 847 pages of detailed analysis, innovative design concepts, financial projections, and implementation strategies that addressed every aspect of the Downtown Renaissance project. But the real secret weapon wasn't in the proposal itself. It was in the relationships I had built during 12 years in the Phoenix market. Every contractor I had worked with Every city official I had collaborated with, every supplier I had negotiated with during my time at Meridian became part of RDG's informal network. These weren't just business contacts. They were people who had seen my work firsthand and trusted my ability to deliver results. The proposal presentation was scheduled for Friday morning in November. 5 firms would have 2 hours each to present their vision for downtown Phoenix to a selection committee that included city council members, business leaders, and community representatives. Victoria Castellano presented first for Meridian, and I had to admit she had improved significantly since our early confrontations. Her presentation was polished, professional, and highlighted Meridian's most successful projects, including several that I had personally managed. David spoke during the financial section, emphasizing Meridian's established relationships and proven track record. He looked confident and comfortable, the same leader who had once inspired my loyalty and admiration. But their presentation had a fatal flaw. It was generic. Despite their experience and resources, Meridian's proposal felt like a template that could have been applied to any major development project. It demonstrated competence without inspiring vision. When my turn came, I began with a single slide that contained just 4 words: Phoenix built Elena Rodriguez. For the next 90 minutes, I walked the selection committee through a proposal that wasn't just about developing downtown Phoenix. It was about understanding downtown Phoenix. Every design element reflected the city's history and culture. Every financial projection was based on specific market analysis of Phoenix demographics and economic trends. Every implementation strategy incorporated relationships with local contractors, suppliers, and craftspeople who had contributed to the city's growth. I didn't just present a development plan. I told the story of how Rodriguez Development Group would honor Phoenix's past while building its future. The questions after my presentation were detailed and challenging, but they revealed something crucial. The selection committee was genuinely excited about RDG's vision. These weren't pro forma inquiries. They were the questions of people who were imagining how our proposal would look when translated into reality. 2 weeks later, Phoenix Development Authority announced their decision. Rodriguez Development Group had been selected as the primary developer for the Downtown Renaissance project. The contract was worth $850 million over 5 years, making RDG one of the largest development firms in the Southwest virtually overnight. More importantly, it established my company as the premier choice for transformational urban projects. The announcement sent shockwaves through the Phoenix development community. Industry publications ran features about the meteoric rise of Rodriguez Development Group and the stunning upset that had bypassed established firms like Meridian Properties. But the real satisfaction came from a phone call I received the day after the announcement. David Castellano's name appeared on my screen, and when I answered, his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. "Elena," he said quietly, "congratulations on the Downtown Renaissance project. You deserve to win." "Thank you, David," I replied. "That means something coming from you." There was a long pause before he continued. "I made a mistake when I chose family over merit. I realize that now." "We all make mistakes," I said. "The question is what we learn from them." "I learned that Elena Rodriguez was the best thing that ever happened to Meridian Properties," he said. "And I was too proud to see it until after I lost it." The collapse of Meridian Properties began 6 months after I won the Downtown Renaissance project, but the warning signs had been visible for much longer. David had built his company on relationships, expertise, and reputation, 3 things that became difficult to maintain when your most experienced leader started competing against you. The first crack appeared when the Westfield Shopping Center project, a $180 million retail development that Meridian had been managing for 2 years, ran into serious problems. The project was 18 months behind schedule, 40% over budget, and facing quality control issues that threatened to kill the entire development. Under normal circumstances, this would have been exactly the kind of crisis I would have been called in to resolve. My systematic approach to problem-solving had saved dozens of troubled projects during my tenure at Meridian. But Victoria was now in charge, and asking for my help would have meant admitting that her leadership was insufficient. Instead, They hired McKinsey Consulting Group, a national firm that specialized in corporate turnaround strategies, and charged $800 per hour to provide solutions that any experienced project manager could have implemented for a fraction of the cost. The results were predictable. McKinsey's consultants spent 3 months analyzing the situation, produced a 300-page report that recommended enhanced coordination protocols and stakeholder alignment strategies, and essentially told Meridian to do what I would have done immediately: fire the incompetent subcontractors and bring in experienced replacements. By the time McKinsey finished their analysis, the problems had multiplied exponentially. The shopping center project was now 2 years behind schedule, facing lawsuits from multiple contractors and hemorrhaging money at a rate that threatened Meridian's entire operational budget. Victoria tried to compensate by pursuing increasingly aggressive growth strategies. She bid on projects outside Meridian's traditional geographic area, partnered with firms they had never worked with before, and promised delivery timelines that were unrealistic even under perfect conditions. The strategy backfired spectacularly when their Denver expansion, a $220 million office complex that Victoria had personally negotiated, collapsed after 6 months due to local regulatory complications that could have been avoided with proper due diligence. The Denver failure cost Meridian over $15 million in unrecoverable expenses and damaged their reputation in a market they had hoped to establish as their next growth opportunity. But the most devastating blow came from their own employees. Marcus' departure to Rodriguez Development Group had been the beginning of a talent exodus that accelerated as Meridian's problems mounted. Project managers, senior coordinators, and even administrative staff began leaving for competitors who offered better opportunities and more competent leadership. Within 18 months of my departure, Meridian had lost 60% of their senior management team and was operating with a skeleton crew of inexperienced employees supervised by consultants who charged premium rates for basic oversight. The final blow came when 3 of Meridian's largest clients, projects worth a combined $400 million, terminated their contracts due to performance failures and quality concerns. The terminations triggered penalty clauses that required Meridian to pay millions in damages while losing the revenue streams that had been funding their operations. I learned about Meridian's collapse through a terse press release announcing that the company was restructuring operations and exploring strategic partnerships to ensure continuity of service for existing clients. Corporate speak for bankruptcy. The most revealing article appeared in Southwest Development magazine, written by an investigative reporter who had interviewed dozens of former employees, clients, and industry contacts. The article was titled "The Fall of an Empire: How Meridian Properties Lost Its Way," and it told the story of a company that had sacrificed proven leadership for family politics. David Castellano called me 2 weeks after the bankruptcy filing was announced. His voice was different, smaller, older, drained of the confidence that had once made him seem invincible. "Elena," he said, "I wanted to personally apologize for how things ended between us. You were right about everything, and I was too proud to see it." "David," I replied, "I'm sorry it came to this. Despite everything, I never wanted to see Meridian fail." "I know," he said quietly, "but maybe failure was inevitable once I chose pride over wisdom." The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 3 years after I had walked out of Meridian Properties' boardroom. The voice belonged to Margaret, executive director of the Southwest Development Association. "Elena," she said with barely contained excitement, "I have news that I think you're going to want to hear in person. Can you come to our office this afternoon?" That afternoon, Margaret handed me an engraved invitation that made my pulse quicken. The Southwest Development Association is pleased to announce that Elena Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Development Group, has been selected as the 2024 Developer of the Year. This award recognizes exceptional leadership, innovative project management, and transformational impact on regional development. Developer of the Year, the highest honor in an industry where recognition was hard-earned and respect was measured in completed projects and satisfied clients. "Elena," Margaret continued, "in 30 years of presenting this award, I've never seen such universal support for a recipient. The board reviewed your work at Meridian, your success with Rodriguez Development Group, and your impact on the industry as a whole. Your story represents everything this association values: excellence, integrity, and resilience. The award ceremony was held at the Phoenician Resort on a perfect May evening. 800 industry professionals filled the ballroom, representing every major firm, contractor, and architect in the region. When Margaret introduced me, the applause felt different than the polite recognition typically given at professional events. This was acknowledgement of something deeper: respect earned through results, admiration built through adversity overcome. My acceptance speech was brief, but it captured everything I wanted the industry to understand. 3 years ago, I learned that loyalty and competence aren't always valued equally in corporate hierarchies. But I also learned that excellence creates its own opportunities and that the courage to start over can lead to achievements that surpass anything you thought possible. Rodriguez Development Group exists because I refused to accept that my worth was determined by other people's decisions. We've succeeded because we never forgot that buildings are just steel and concrete until they're filled with human dreams and aspirations. To the young professionals in this audience, your career will be defined not by the companies that hire you, but by the standards you set for yourself and the courage you show when those standards are tested. Build something that matters. Build something that lasts. And never let anyone convince you that their limitations should become your ceiling. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes and felt like validation of everything I had sacrificed to get there. During the reception, David Castellano approached me with an expression I had never seen before: genuine admiration mixed with something that looked like pride. "Elena," he said quietly, "I wanted to congratulate you personally. You've built something extraordinary, and you've done it with a kind of integrity that makes the entire industry better." "Thank you, David," I replied. "That means something coming from you." He nodded, then said something that felt like the final resolution of everything that had happened between us. "I spent 12 years trying to build a legacy. You spent 2 years actually doing it. I should have realized sooner that the student had become the master." 5 years have passed since I walked out of Meridian Properties' boardroom, and the view from my corner office has changed dramatically. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, I can see a dozen buildings that bear Rodriguez Development Group's signature, including the downtown Renaissance towers that transformed Phoenix's skyline. Rodriguez Development Group now employs 73 people, manages projects worth over $3.2 billion, and has expanded operations into Texas, Colorado, and Nevada. We've won every major industry award, established partnerships with the most prestigious clients in the Southwest, and created a corporate culture that values excellence over politics. The irony of my story is that I never set out to destroy Meridian Properties. I simply set out to build something better. Their collapse was a consequence of their own decisions, not my revenge. When you replace competence with nepotism, experience with ambition, and strategic thinking with wishful thinking, failure becomes inevitable regardless of external competition. David called me last month with news I had been expecting. He's selling the remnants of Meridian Properties to a national firm. At 71, he's finally ready to retire, and Victoria has accepted a position with the acquiring company rather than continuing to struggle with independent operations. "Elena," he said during that final conversation, "I've spent the last 5 years regretting the decision to push you out. Not because of what happened to Meridian, but because I lost the chance to watch you build something extraordinary as part of our family." "David," I replied, "you did watch me build something extraordinary. You just didn't realize it was never going to belong to you." If you're reading this and recognizing elements of your own professional experience, the broken promises, the overlooked contributions, the choice between accepting diminished roles or risking everything to start over, I want you to understand something fundamental. Your value isn't determined by other people's recognition, and your potential isn't limited by other people's vision. The skills that made you valuable to someone else's organization can make you indispensable to your own. The relationships you've built, the expertise you've developed, and the reputation you've earned belong to you, not to the companies that benefited from them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's construction. Build something better. Build something that lasts. Build something that bears your name and reflects your values. And never let anyone convince you that their limitations should become your ceiling. The view from the top of your own empire is worth every risk you take to get there.